Welcome to another episode of Gamers, Developers, and Scholars. I'm your host Javier, and joining me today are...
Sucker prize!
Hi, I'm in Ladyem.
And I'm Poppy Wild.
And we finish discussing Chicken Police. What an enjoyable journey. Shelly was just making the right question and we were about to answer it, but I said no, let's wait for the actual call to begin. So please, Shelly, now go ahead.
I want y'all's opinion on that twist ending, especially when you found out the truth in the asylum.
So I really liked it, but my only problem with it is that I think it took the game a little bit of time to get to so I'd already come to that conclusion, and so it took a little bit of time for the game to catch up. So that was my only frustration. I was like, come on, Marty, come on, Sonny.
You guys supposed to be good at your jobs. Come on.
I know. And there was that kind of hinting towards it, just being kind of like, I think I've got some ideas, but I need to wait until all the clues are in place. But I loved it. I thought it was a good twist. And yeah, I think for me it was interesting that that's the focus that we came away with, because obviously the last episode of Gamers, Dev, Scholars I wasn't here, so the previous one, when we were discussing the end of chapter 2, we were all still kind of, which way is it going to go? What's the kind of main focus going to be? Where's the story what action is it going to follow? And so, yeah, I was not expecting it to take that route. And I did really like it. And I really liked how they portrayed the mentality of, I can't remember the other one's name now. So there was Ibn and Albert. Yeah. So I loved the kind of crazy letter and all of that dialogue where he was saying, no, I am Ibn is me, we can't be, So yeah, I really liked it. My only frustration was, like, say, the chicken police just being a little bit slow at that point.
But at the end...
But that makes I can feel good about myself, right? Because I can be like, I'm cleverer than the chicken police. So.
Quite an achievement, yeah. What did you think, Anne, about that ending?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is funny is that the whole time that I was playing this, every time they would talk about Albert Weissler, the only thing that would come up to my mind is Albert Wesker from Resident Evil. I just kept thinking about him.
Yeah, phonetically, I get you.
Yeah. I was like, Albert Wesker. And I don't know if that was like an intentional, like, somewhat similarity there, but having both be the twist villain in a way.
And it was the villain as
about
well.
Resident Evil 1.
yeah. Like 20 years spoiler, 30
yes,
years
yeah,
spoiler.
20 years spoiler.
The body.
But yeah, I mean, I liked it. I'm not sure, like, the whole... I have issues usually with the whole, like, split personality is the villain. I do take issue with that often, and I think that it's handled okay here, partially because you don't really go into it all that much. But I was a little icked out about that, but I think it was handled pretty well.
There's a concern there, isn't it, that it becomes like a very ableist discourse where it's like, and the villain is... I mean, I think also it's interesting because obviously we also have that with race, right? We also often have the connotation that historically the villain has been played by, like, black people, and obviously that's extremely problematic in terms of racism. And that's also interesting in terms of when we look at the racism within the game. I guess from that perspective, like, is it surprising that the rat was also, there's kind of that aspect as well. But yeah, I thought because of the twin aspect as well of them, like, I thought kind of, as you say, sort of maybe made that gave that a different dimension, perhaps, that didn't just focus on it from a kind of ableist perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the only thing that bothered me.
If we didn't have that resource of the split personality and it were just the rat, it would probably have some issues about, oh, it's the obvious animal that is the rat, the one that is the villain. Interesting. Because I felt similar to Anne, what she was describing, that I felt that I would get a more interesting motive, instead of split personality. That's why I look forward, Bobcat, to what you think. The question that Shelly asked is, what did we think about this twist ending?
Yeah, I'm kind of mixed on it. This is the problem with a lot of noir media, is a lot of it is very tight and very contained, and you have very few characters, but the problem is you have to then come up with an ending that's not going to be completely predictable. Mm-hmm. Because, like, I have gotten into so many sort of detective or mystery games, and I'm just like, oh, it's obviously whoever. Either because they are, like, entirely too nice and they're relying on you being very trusting, or because it's, the obvious villain. You can deduce pretty quickly once you know the tropes. And so, like, I have to admit, it felt a little bit forced, but I also don't know how else it could have been done. Mm-hmm. It's a genre where it's really easy to write yourself into a corner, because the whole point of it is you're exploring the excesses and the sort of private lives of people. And so everyone's going to come off looking bad, at which point everybody comes off looking sympathetic, at which point, what do?
Mm-hmm. In this case... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, approaching it from a writing standpoint, I think it's a real challenge to do something with it. And I at least applaud them for not going too obvious of a route with it,
Yeah, I was describing that with split personality, it is very easy, I believe, to get it wrong. Maybe here it was a solution, not a perfect solution, but it was a solution. For me, at the beginning, I thought it would be even Weissler. But I thought, no, it is too obvious. So at some point I thought, maybe we can have a love triangle. I didn't suspect that it would be a triangle with a twin that has a split personality. Maybe there's some originality there. But I felt until the very end, oh my god, and he has a split personality. I didn't get enough, let's say, hints so that I can go back to the story and, oh my god, it was there all the time. At some point, Sonny reflects that Natasha didn't feel Weissler was the same. However, since I interrogated him, I didn't notice that, and I believe as a character, as the detective, I could have experienced that in the actual interrogation. Like, this person is sometimes, I don't know, too happy, or sometimes he's too paranoid, even in the interrogation.
There's a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah, like I felt something, because there were some other characters, like Bubo, for example. I liked him a lot, who was this doctor, but who had this weird thing about apparently eating the parts of his patients, and it is somewhat understandable because an owl is a predator. It is not a very obvious predator, but it is a predator. So I like that. There was this subtlety of, yeah, he could be a wicked doctor. In the case of even Weissler, besides being a rat, I didn't feel this. But I wonder, Shelly, since you asked the question, what did you think about this ending?
Well, I was like on 50-50 when it came with that love triangle between the Weissler brothers and Natasha. When I found out about the body, I figured, okay, maybe... At first, I thought Ibn Weissler got rid of his brother so he wouldn't have to worry about competition. But once I got to the asylum, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Maybe Natasha had some sort of attraction to Ibn, then Weissler mutilated his brother, then took his place, since they're twins. And the scary thing about twins is that they could take on your role, and no one would be none the wiser.
In that sense, I wonder, Bobcat, since you know the genre, do twins appear taking over someone's role in this genre? Because I have seen that, but elsewhere, not in this genre.
That is a thing that has happened. I cannot think of any specific examples, but I know that it is one of the kind of like tropes within this. Again, the whole thing is about the underhanded tactics people use, and that's a fairly obvious one. But yeah, no, I like what you said about going back and looking at the story again. To me, that is the mark of a really good mystery, is how do you perceive it on the second time? Because even though you already know the answer to the mystery, that's where you start to see a lot of that foreshadowing and stuff like that. A really good example of this genre doing that in an interesting way is the movie Hot Fuzz. Because you have so many little clues and everything like that, and whenever it comes time for the final reveal, it's such a, like, it's a case where the reveal actually does make a lot of sense and everything fits together. You start to realize that, oh no, everything was working up towards this. And I don't know that we have that here in the same way. It's a case where I don't want to criticize it too hard, because I think it's a well-written game. I think it's just a game that doesn't fully understand the genre that it's working with outside of like what has been seen in a few movies and things like that,
At least the ride was enjoyable, and it gives us a lot to think about, absolutely. Personally, I prefer when there are games that have, because every game has flaws, I appreciate how maybe a flaw is a consequence of getting so many other things right. And we heard from Imre that the developers originally intended for the game to be bigger. So maybe the compromise of having such high quality in so many other places is that they had to force a bit maybe the ending so that it wasn't too big of a game. I'm not sure if, for example, that was why we hear constantly about these factions, and at the end of the day they didn't have that much of an impact. I know that there are games that have, and in this case we need some red herrings, and we are also doing world building. And there are games that, let's say, force too much. The exposition is too heavy. For example, with Kojima. So this is the opposite. We saw too little. It was interesting. Maybe at least I wanted to see more of it. Go ahead, Bobcat. You have some thoughts on this?
So what I think is going on here is a big mistake that a lot of people make while writing, and that is the idea that your writing has to be done in a linear way. You have to come up with your beginning, you have to come up with your middle, you have to come up with your end in that order, and that is absolutely not true, and I wish more people would break themselves of it. It is completely acceptable to figure out where your story's going, and then figure out how you're getting there, and then come up with a setup. Like, it's okay, and we see so many times of games that have stuff cut that they didn't think about where the ending was going. Or they overcorrected because they were going to have to take out, this clue or this, interim piece, and so then the ending doesn't make any sense. Again, a prime example, Knights of the Old Republic 2. Large chunks of that game had to be cut.
Yeah.
And as a result, you reach a certain point in the game where you are essentially just teleported to the end. Nothing is, there's no real build-up, there's no setup, you're just, we're ending the game now. And that is one of the worst things that you want to do, and especially whenever you're coming up with a mystery. You want to think about, all right, who do we have as our, as our ultimate villain here? How do we get there? And I think that in many ways, a lot of games that try to have those mysteries go the opposite direction, where they try to go from the audience perspective of what would be interesting, how do we do this, and stuff like that. And I think that you can go back and take that approach once you have your basic outline done, but you don't want to do that until you have an idea of where you're going to end up.
Yeah, it is potentially a risk that, let's say, you try to do something right for the audience, but it is not consistent with the rest of the game, even though it may be polished for the audience, an aspect of it.
Yeah, and it's why I don't like when a mystery has multiple solutions depending on how you play the game, because what it usually means is that those mysteries are not well constructed. Silent Hill Downpour. the nature of the crime that your main character commits depends on how you played the game. But what that means is that a lot of what goes on in the game, which is supposed to be deeply psychological in the previous games, loses its impact because you might not have actually done anything wrong at all. And you lose the entire point of the town. You lose the entire point of Silent Hill. And I think that's why you need to commit it to what you're going to be doing first.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah.
In this case, I believe that fortunately, even from the description of the game, they not only describe it as a film noir mystery, but a body cop film noir. So apparently that element was very important for them, and at least that the relationship between our two chicken police characters was strong until the very end. Maybe they took more care about that. At the same time, I always go back to what you described, Poppy, on our very first conversation, that it was potentially a missed opportunity to have our humans just with the heads of chickens. Now that we have seen completely the journey of our characters, their complete arc, do you feel that it was still like a resource that was not as completely used to see the relationships of different species instead of just humans with different heads?
Yes, I do feel like that. I think, you know, as you said earlier, you know, I don't want to be too critical of the game because I think for what it is, it's very good. That said, yeah, I do think it would be interesting to see how more of the kind of animal relations came into it. And I think in particular to think about that in terms of not just necessarily viewing that as kind of the characteristics that we, you know, impose on animals, but really looking at what specific behaviors they have. So that was quite interesting with the doctor at the asylum. And that was a snake, right?
Yeah, Dr. Quetzalcoatl, the name of a Mexican god. Quetzal, they call him in English.
Okay. Interesting added context there. Yeah, so I thought, you know, that was a kind of character that I would have liked to have seen more of in particular, and kind of thinking about how, you know, how birds and a snake and a rat would all kind of behave around one another. But I think also when we think about, you know, the idea of Ibn and, sorry, I've forgotten again, Albert or Alfred?
Albert.
Albert.
Or Wesker among friends.
Yes. You know, thinking about that as well from the perspective of, like, the rat falling in love with the cat is, you know, I think there could have been some interesting kind of psychological developments, you know, from that perspective as well, where, you know, he falls in love with her but by virtue of her beauty and him painting her. And I think we get a bit of a sense that Ibn is her plaything sort of thing. But I think it might have been interesting to, capitalize on those relationships a little bit more through that animalistic perspective, bring a bit more of the animal into some of those kind of reasonings and those behaviors. I mean, it would have made a completely different game, right? So, you know, it's not necessarily to say that would have been better. It would have been an interesting angle to explore further. And I think that, you know, all of that stuff that they've created, you know, what you were saying really about that world building and about those different factions and about all of that, you know, it does make me wonder what more, you know, could happen in this world and how that could be explored differently. And maybe, you know, some of those bigger issues that we've touched upon to kind of see if in a wider use of this world, how they might be explored further in ways that kind of can take the player on different journeys through those issues.
Yeah, I think, like, not every game needs to be thought of like this, but I think that in this case, one of the things that you're going to have to think about is, to what end are we doing this? What is the goal? What is the... a lot of times people try to boil a game down to its unique selling point. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's always necessarily the way to go, but I think that, like, whenever it comes to the animal thing, what are we adding by doing the animal thing? Mm-hmm. And that's not even to say that it shouldn't be there. Again, I'm not criticizing, because I liked the aesthetic of it. I think that it looked really cool, but I think that is something that you need to ask whenever you are introducing an element like that can fundamentally change the game or fundamentally change how people view the characters. This is
yeah, sorry, just to say that, like you say, it adds a lot to the world, but it doesn't add to this story, right? So we get a lot of those kind of those tensions, all of that kind of racial connotation, the whole, Marty asking Sonny, have you tried the tofu kind of stuff? We've got all of those added elements. The royalists and the separatists, all of that. Kind of at the end of chapter 2, I was really interested to see where that would go, and then it kind of feels like they did a lot of setup with that stuff to create this really good world that then this specific storyline didn't really take further.
Because, like, in the case of anthropomorphic animals, you've almost got this sliding scale. We talked about Zootopia. In Zootopia, that figures in quite heavily. They talk a lot about how the different animals interact, the story is built around the world building that they did. And then on the other end of the scale, you have Sam and Max, where it's a dog and a rabbit, and who cares? They're just a dog and a rabbit. Just go with it. They'll occasionally make a joke, but it doesn't matter. But that's okay, because it's all about that aesthetic. And I'm wondering kind of where Chicken Police falls on this, or what their intention was, if it was just for the aesthetic, or if it was, to actually build that world. Because, the thing is, even if I were to talk to the developers and they said, we just thought Chicken Police would be, like, a fun twist or, it'd be a funny take on it, I can accept that. That's perfectly fine. That's
it would work.
Yeah. But, yeah, I think it's a case where maybe they lost a little bit of focus when it came to how they were integrating this idea of it's police, but they're chickens,
Personally, I believe that a benefit of this, as it got implemented, this balance of I always have trouble saying the word anthropomorphization. Okay, I think so. Is that it looks awesome on screenshots. It's memorable. Believe me, as a developer, that's like 50% of the battle. Perhaps on a more narrative, profound way, there is not much of an impact, as you guys were describing. Personally, I wasn't even aware of posthumanism until I read your paper, Poppy, and now I see my human bias and our bias as developers constantly. So maybe this idea by itself is somewhat new, at least in developer circles. So I wouldn't fault them too much about not seizing completely this resource. At least it worked into making a fun game and a game that can be discovered. That is so much of the first battle that has to be won for an indie game. After this first successful game, I believe it's doing well. Then, fortunately, they can do another game, perhaps more ambitious with how they use resources, at least with the world, which I can feel that this is what they want to explore more. That's why it's so richly layered.
Yeah,
they've just released the director's cut as well.
Yeah,
so
it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming.
One of the things, though, that I think is important to note is what's been going on in the indie gaming space, and that is a very heavy emphasis on the aesthetic of a game. Because there's, we've come to accept that there are limitations in terms of what you can do technically, but also some of those restrictions have really been lifted. People can make games in the CryEngine, people can make games in more complex 3D engines, but I think a lot more indie games are wanting to play with what we can do with aesthetic. And so you see the PS1 era aesthetic a lot, with all kinds of games, mostly horror games right now. And what's the purpose of the PS1 aesthetic? I don't know, but it kind of looks cool and it's sort of nostalgic. And you see this more and more with indie games, and so I'm wondering if, in many ways, this was just, hey, this looks really cool, let's play with this aesthetic, you know, and we'll drop in an idea, you know, a real basic murder mystery story and kind of run with it, you know, because that's become a fairly common thing.
And that is very enjoyable to make our interpretation. Sometimes, believe me guys, as players we come up with more interesting reasons, theories, that what really as developers sometimes we do things. Sometimes it's like because our 3D artists couldn't work on that particular weekend, so we had to make a prototype and it worked and players loved it, and that's why things happen in that sense. And I wonder if since you have studied how games fortunately can reach wider audiences than, let's say, just the gamer, do you think that even though we here are enjoy this title, may it lose the gamer audience, this type of game, because it is a visual novel, it has so many tropes? Do you think that is a risk for any developers that follow this way?
I don't actually think it is a big risk, honestly, because, I mean, I think that anybody who is really into games would be interested in something like this, but there is a subset that would be very put off by this, that, you know, it's too much writing, too much reading, and that's fine. It's not for everybody. But I think that the game itself, the way that it sets itself up, the world that it creates, I think that it could have some wide interest, honestly. Although I do think that some of the racial undertones there would be overlooked or a little controversial if somebody was really interested in making it like that. But I think that it actually could be pretty popular if it like were to blow up and could have some wide interest with the gamer.
And now let's think this very same content, but with people. Instead of this half-human, instead of the animal heads, if there were these racial issues, if there were the same content, but with people, do you think we'd have the same wide audience? That's so interesting, isn't it?
I think also, you know, if you look at it from that perspective, so we've talked about the racial aspect. We've kind of touched on some of the ableist aspects in terms of, you know, who the villain turns out to be. There's also the gender aspects as well, where all of the women in this story are, again, you know, they're very stereotypical kind of stock characters. You know, there's no one. We've got Monica fulfilling the, you know, sexy, smart receptionist, secretary. We've obviously got the overwhelming sex appeal of the cat.
Femme fatale.
Yeah, the femme fatale. Even Molly is kind of, you know, again, occupying this very specific gendered space. And then there's, I can't remember what is she a crow or a raven?
Olivia.
The raven,
again, you know, the raven, super kind of sleek but cool and aloof. Like they're all really, and again, you know, even the kind of the maitre d', the alligator / crocodile. Again, I feel like I'm making terrible mistakes. Yeah, sorry. It's a while since I finished it now because I ended up just binging it. But
I can see that. I finished the game just yesterday. So
okay,
know,
so yeah, you're still in the zone. So you know, from that perspective, there are some political issues here in terms of what we look for in socially progressive games. I think if the racial stuff had kind of you know, and again in episode 2 when we talked about this, there was that kind of question of like how will the racial stuff work? How could it go further? How can it work without going further? But there is then that question of, if that's not done in a sensitive way, that could just come across like doing racism, but behind the excuse of it's animals, right?
Yeah. I think what's going on in a lot of ways is just copying the tropes of noir stuff without giving it that critical eye. I mean, the reality is everything you're talking about is very typical of noir stories.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
But that's because the stories hit their peak in like the 30s and 40s.
Exactly, right?
So,
How do we
After the Great
reimagine that in a
Depression,
world and how do we
Right.
reimagine that in a world where, yes, we're drawing on some of those things to, capture an audience, but we're also going, well, you know what, we are in 2021, and if we're going to put chickens on the head of our police, maybe we can also think about making those police female, or maybe we can have some different gender identities, some different sexualities present, some racial connotations that are explored in ways that are, kind of that it is, we're aware of that being an issue, and there is, like I say, there is this background of it being an issue in Chicken Police, but as I say, it doesn't add to this story, which is perhaps a miss. And I think, as Anna picked up, I did really enjoy the twist with the Weisslers and the rats taking each other's place. But yeah, that is again a very kind of stereotypical ableist ending, where it's like, oh, and who'd have thought it? It's the person in the asylum. So yeah, and I think absolutely, as you say, Javier, if we didn't have chicken heads, we'd be going, oh, hold on, like this is way more problematic.
Yeah. But
so it's about how can they use that in a way that that advances those issues, not just excuses them.
Which at the same time, I believe that we don't need to demand every game to push the envelope. In this case, for example, it apparently was a story that would put front and center the buddies, the friends. They did that perfectly. I absolutely loved some somewhat existential conversations about, I was ready to kill you, but when we were in the ship on fire, I preferred to be nowhere else. Oh my god, that was meaningful. And maybe they didn't, as you say, Poppy, solve or contribute something equally meaningful on racial issues, on gender issues. Not every game can provide enough content for all the different issues. It's just, perhaps in this case, it was just the context. But I believe it is very useful to identify that because they were chickens, because they were animals, there was this tolerance, there was this fictional pact. And that can be used, fortunately, for more things. I believe we have a developer audience, a creator audience. So this is something that can help in order to explore other hard topics. People may go into Chicken Police or other games saying, oh, it's just animals, it's not serious, let's play, let's enjoy. And there could be some subtext of something really hard to process, but because they're chickens, people are tolerating it. So this is something meaningful, something that can be reused in future stories, future games by itself.
Yeah.
Completely agree, and I think it does give that opportunity. As I said a couple of episodes ago, it is important that we have issues of racism dealt with in games, visible in games, because it does exactly as you say, Javier, allow different audiences to come to it in a different way. It's just about how we then take that and do something with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bobcat, you had some thoughts?
So, I think part of the issue is that it's hard to examine things like that critically whenever you have a level of detachment from it. Like, the thing that I've pointed out before is how people are weirdly sympathetic to villains and things that have committed horrible atrocities, but there's enough of a gap there that they have their redemption arc. The example I always use is in Star Wars, where they blew up a planet with millions of people on it. I get that Darth Vader made me reconciled with his kid, but there's still that thing we have to contend with.
Great point.
But it's so easy to gloss over it because we're detached from it. This is not something that we have any sort of point of reference for, and so it blew up a planet in the first movie, and Leia was there, but we don't know anybody else from that planet. And so it's easy to kind of excuse some of these things, I feel like, a lot of times, because we're removed from it. And talking about how this would play in recent years, I was immediately reminded of L.A. Noir, which just straight up didn't deal with the issues. It was just like, what do you want? It's the 40s, this is how things are. And so you have a lot of racial issues and a lot of racial slurs being thrown around, and you have the sort of the gender dynamics of 1947. And the weird thing was, I think because it was such a, or at least they were billing it as, an accurate reproduction of the 40s, nobody really called it out. And I feel like Chicken Police is in this weird place where there's not enough detachment. The animals are just human enough that we can see that these are problems, but at the same time, I feel like there's enough detachment that you may not catch it on the first time, and I don't know how I feel about that sort of issue, you know, of it being kind of just realistic enough to actually be problematic, but not realistic enough to really be dealing with that issue, you know.
I mean, it is a fine balance of being provocative, and I applaud the developers for being provocative. Maybe we would have enjoyed in different ways to use more their resources in some areas, but I prefer that in contrast with, let's say, going into a really meaningful story that addresses racism, but sadly may not be, like we were saying, with an as wide with an audience. If your story is the best or meaningful and edgy, but it just reaches, I don't know, your 5 friends.
Here's the thing, though. I don't think Chicken Police was being provocative. I think Chicken Police was imitating the tropes of its genre, of noir genre, without really being critical of it. It feels in many, like, don't get me wrong, there were some good things that were in there. I like the buddy cop aspect. I like that it was more of a character piece, because that captures the spirit of noir without just copying it. But I feel like the actual notes of the story just copied what was already there. And as a result, you wind up with, again, a lot of 1930s through 1950s sensibilities within the story that aren't actually addressed. And while I understand that, yeah, okay, it's from a developer standpoint, it's better to have a story that plays well with an audience than it is to have the greatest story that no one ever reads. But I think that we've seen in recent years that that's not the dichotomy that exists. That there are a lot of games that are able to challenge these things and still reach a wide audience.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that there was an opportunity here to play with these tropes and actually say something meaningful about, hey, maybe we should be more critical of this media, or hey, maybe this is, you know. And so, like I said, that's kind of my issue with that whole thing.
Absolutely.
Is in so many ways this felt like just copying the homework of noir movies. And again, I like it, but that's because I like noir movies. But it's copying the homework without actually understanding some of what's going on behind it.
Yeah, maybe our noir, in the case of these developers, these racial issues, were our context, so that we were interested in this world. Whenever we are introduced to a new world, if you don't care about this society, well, no matter how interesting the characters, they could feel like they're in a void. So they did that work. And apparently they devoted more resources into what you were saying, the characters being really good friends that still have issues. And meaningful issues. I mean, one shot the other, and still the other looks for him for help. Even though we don't see that much action, I did feel emotions about this relationship, about it being troubled. We have to choose our battles as creators. So in their case, apparently they chose this one, and it was done well. And it's good that we want to see apparently more of this into far more developed ways. I really want to see the Hive at some point, because that one I feel that could be somewhat more different from it's just humans but with insect heads. At least the one insect that we saw, they couldn't even communicate with him. So there is something, for me, promising.
Yeah, I was bummed that we didn't get to see the Hive at all, because they kept talking about it, and like, all right, well, are we gonna like go and like investigate where the body would have been, or you know, what are we gonna do? And it's like, no, we're just gonna ignore that happened. So that was a big bummer. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. You could see it. I saw it. I believe it was somewhat optional, or it could be missed. But you could see the Hive in the restaurant when it's day. It's in the background.
Oh, I think I missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it is
must
possible
admit
to
that
see it. You can even select it and you get a brief description. Yeah, but it is something somewhat subtle. And you can see that it is not, let's say, a human building. No, it looks like a massive hive. Like a beehive, something like that.
Interesting.
I'll be really interested to see what the producers do next, because like I say, I know they've you can buy the music from Chicken Police. I think they're working on graphic novels to go with it, and like I say, I think they've just released or just releasing the director's cut. But I would be really interested to see if there was going to be a kind of a sequel or a spin-off in the same world.
Absolutely.
To see how they could take that further.
Normally, when we see the merchandising side happening, is because they're exploring pre-production. So it could be an interesting opportunity. It's also a way to see, hey, is the market still hungry for more of this content? Personally, I am. So I'll look into what content, let's say, is more interesting for me. Because I know that, as you said, there's music. I believe there's going to be short stories, something like that. Personally, I'd go for the short stories.
I want to ask you guys, I did some research into the game and I found out that there is a secret ending. Did anybody see the secret ending?
Okay.
No. I don't know.
So the only hint I got about a secret ending is that there's the credits, and after the credits, there's more content. I'm not sure if you saw that, guys.
Yeah, it was after the credits.
I can't remember, because like I say, I finished it a couple of weeks ago. What happens?
Okay, so there's the credits, and after that, the cats, Natasha, visits again. Yeah, Sunny.
Yeah.
And they discuss a bit the wife. That we fantasize when we're working at the brothel of meeting a good man. And that your wife was very fortunate because she did meet you. And then Natasha gives a pack of cigarettes and Sonny throws them to the trash bin.
Matches. It's matches.
Matches.
Sorry.
He's got the cigarette the whole way through, hasn't he? He's got that busted up cigarette the whole way through.
You're right. It's matches. And there's a number written on that. And you can call that number. So if you start a new game,
you can call it.
You can call that number.
Oh, okay. So I saw that, and then I wondered whether, we were gonna go back into gameplay, so I could call the number, but it didn't. So I didn't know you could start. Okay, so what happens when you call the number?
Okay, so you call the number, and I was ready, and you get a song. You hear Natasha singing. I believe it is a song that we already heard, the one at the bar. That's it. But there's, at least on my playthrough, I didn't get to see anymore. I just got a song. Okay. I'm not sure if there's more content.
Then after that, there is a scene with the shadow of Molly, who goes to knock on the door, but then doesn't actually do it.
Doesn't do what?
She doesn't actually knock. She goes to knock and then stops.
Okay,
and then you get a zoom out of the hallway. And I was like, oh my god, that's her. I recognize the silhouette. So that's the secret. And
you unlock this by calling?
I didn't do it. I just searched into it because I always, after I beat a game, to look into what people are saying. And I saw the whole thing about secret ending. I'm like, what do you mean a secret ending? So I looked it up on YouTube. But yeah, you have to collect all of the little
the
books throughout the game to unlock it. But yeah, a silhouette of Molly is about to knock on the door and then hesitates.
That tells us.
It seems like they're setting themselves up to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That tells us a lot about the characters, because it's good that you identify the silhouette of a character we never saw.
Yeah.
And that hyped you. I believe that is a lot. That is well done work. Yeah.
I think, like you said, Javier, the immediate recognizability of the game. I was lecturing some students on Friday and was showing them, what I've been up to recently, and was and this is the game I've been playing. And, you immediately you just see one image of the game, and you immediately have some kind of, I don't know, thoughts, ideas, perceptions about it. And I think, as you say, that's really strong. And I mean, I think, we're we're here to be critical and kind of analyze the game and look into all of those aspects. I still really enjoyed it. I did enjoy the twist. I enjoyed the characters. But you know, we can do things from both sides, right? We can enjoy something but also be critical of it and look to its kind of potential areas that might be problematic and the potential areas that we might want to see it kind of expand into. So I'm glad that I played it. It was an enjoyable experience. I don't think I've played anything. I mean, I did play Sam & Max many moons ago, but I can't think that I've played anything like Chicken Police other than that. So, you know, it was good. And I did really like the music. As I said, you know, before, I really liked the music. I thought the voice actors were fantastic. I thought, you know, the aesthetic of the world was really good, and they did do some really good world building. But yeah, equally, you know, there are certain social issues there that, as you say, had they all been human, I would have been finding it grossly problematic and been really angry about it. So, you know, from that perspective, what they've done is clever, but also, yeah, definitely speaks to further opportunities.
And in that sense, go ahead, Anne, please.
I was going to say it's something that my best friend and I say on our podcast all the time, of like how important it is to be critical of the media that you love. Because a lot of people can get caught up in the fact that they like something so much that they can't look at, like, well, what could have been done differently? What actually is it saying here? I think that's so important, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. And we really have to think about, like, what are we consuming and what are we taking out of it? And a lot of people just don't do that with games, which is a big bummer. But that's something that we are constantly saying on that podcast, is that you really just have to have a critical eye no matter, like, what you're playing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing either. And I mean, I think we all can say that we really enjoyed playing this game, and it did a lot right. But I think that there's also nothing inherently wrong about being critical or saying, you know, this could have been different, or thinking about, like you said, if this had been done with people, what would we have come away with it with? So I think that that's a really good point you made, Bobby.
Yeah.
It's the media lecturer in me. Let's all be critical.
That's why I really wanted to have you with the squad, because you study different platforms. Some, for example, as a developer, you really have to get to know games in order to make them, because, oh my god, the intricacies of making anything, let's not say work, not crash, is a lot.
Yeah.
If you can get then something meaningful, oh my god, you're really doing something good. And then getting an audience, oh my god, it is a lot. And in order for us to improve our industry, we can say, because I have colleagues who do this, the market is not appreciating my effort. I work so much, and that should be enough for it. And I'm like, no. If we're not doing something enjoyable for players, then we're failing, no matter how much of an effort. And in the same way, if we can't have a dialogue, a constructive dialogue, then we can't even really enjoy something. If you can only consume and not talk about it, well, I have lived in the ends of a dictatorship. You guys don't want to have that. It is awful.
No, like I've talked a lot before about the whole like 0 or 10 mentality, where you run across one hurdle and all of a sudden the game is trash, or because it's not for you, therefore the game is bad, or something like that. And it irks me that there's no room for a game that is like a 7 out of 10. That's a perfectly acceptable thing. A game can be good, it can have flaws, and at the end of the day you come away with a relatively positive impression, or a negative impression, or just, I played that and that sure was an experience. These are all perfectly acceptable reactions to have. And it irks me that a lot of media discourse is boiled down to, well, there's this flaw with this thing, so therefore it's bad. Terrible. Nobody should ever experience this.
No.
You know, and like the reality is, I get this a lot whenever I talk to people, that they think that I absolutely hate something, when in reality, no, this is something I enjoy. It's just, there are flaws, and we can talk about those flaws, and I can still like that thing.
Yeah.
How I am about Persona.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Love Persona. Have a shelf about Persona.
Or as gets brought up quite frequently here, I'm a huge Kojima fan. I acknowledge there are flaws with Kojima, and that it's okay that those games are not for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you know, the thing is, like, one of the things I want to say is I really enjoy Chicken Police, even though I was fairly critical of it here today, because I want to see more games doing more with what it was trying to do. I just, you know, like, I think what was there was good. I just think it could have been better, and I had problems with how it went about it, you know.
I believe they
It
had
made me think of my brother and I always joke about all the whole, like, literally unplayable comments of, like, if it's just a little bit not pretty in parts, literally unplayable. So my brother and I just text each other constantly, literally unplayable.
The other thing that I always bring up is I am a Sonic fan, and you would not know that hearing me talk about Sonic, because I will rip into literally every Sonic game, but it's because I'm a fan. If I weren't, I wouldn't care and I wouldn't talk about it. I would just say Sonic is terrible. Let's not even talk about it.
There's a great author, Johan Huizinga, and in his book Homo Ludens, he describes something very true, and that is the worst reaction you can have to a game is not what we're saying, this hate, but it is indifference. And this scientist, he described that when people cheat, that's again another great recognition that they are so invested into the game that they are willing to look for ways that take some effort in order to get a result that they care about. And if we got people to channel this care, this interest, but in more productive ways, I believe we can have a healthy industry. What I think somewhat is missing, as we have described, is content, meaningful content that goes away from just a grade. But also I believe the channels. Where you discuss things, where you discover things, influences a lot what kind of content will, let's say, go to the front page. And in that way, there are so many things around games that are very oriented towards something quick to consume. And naturally, that is the opposite of what we're doing here, of a meaningful critique saying, I like this, but there's all of this that could have been done better, but at the end of the day, I like this. How do you say that in one tweet, for example? Or in one 10-second, I don't know, the videos of this social network that the cool kids are using. I don't know how long the videos are. But it is hard because the internet is orienting somewhat towards these very consumable, quick things. TikTok, yeah, I remember. I'm so old.
TikTok, yeah.
No, yeah.
I knew what you were talking about.
I always forget it, yeah.
I'm going to shamelessly plug my own videos here. That is, like, I've gone on the rant before about how I hate review scores and about how Metacritic completely ruins the industry. I always end the video with 3 questions. Did I like it? Do I think that this is good? Would you like it? Because those are the 3 actual things that matter in a review, as opposed to, like, when you had the whole kerfuffle with Breath of the Wild because somebody gave it a 7 out of 10, but it should have been a 9 out of 10, and it knocked it down on Metacritic from being the greatest viewed game of all time to below Ocarina of Time, which was a mortal sin somehow. And there were people who were so following the Metacritic charts as opposed to actually just going out and playing the game and enjoying the game that they liked. You know, like, that's, I don't know. That's a whole thing in and of itself. But no, I think, yeah, people, I hate the reaction of like, well, I was going to read your review, but it was too long, or I was going to watch the video, but it was more than like 5 minutes now. I don't care that much.
Yeah, we're still discovering what is the best way to communicate these complex ideas. Our medium is young in comparison with the others. For example, with books, fortunately, especially with, let's say, non-fiction, with history that I read a lot for our game, it is totally okay if you just go into a specific chapter. There are people who go specifically for the footnotes, and it is totally okay. And there are harsh criticism of sources, everything that the Spanish wrote, for example. and yet it is such valuable content that every historian wants to see at some point, even with a heavy bias. But naturally, history, well, and books are something so mature by this point, and still with so many issues like you have described, and especially when studying games as a historian. In our case, we're the youngest of mediums. Still, it is good that we demand to have a better conversation and happenings in our lifetimes, not in centuries.
I think as well, like it's interesting how in terms of all of those newer mediums, how that the space for that critique and conversation is constantly adapting. You look at Twitter, started out with 140 characters, moved up to 280 characters. Now people regularly do threads. Even TikTok, again, the amount of TikTok kind of stories that are spread across several parts. And then again, you look at something like YouTube where, and here we all are, where it has adapted to this space to have these critical conversations. So I think it is one of those things that we're living in a world where our news saturation and our content does happen very quickly, but the space for that conversation and that criticality and the desire for it is still there. It's just about those, sometimes different things happen in different places.
The discoverability aspect, possibly. Mm-hmm. Not only of games, but of the good critiques.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. The audience is there for it, but equally, sometimes sometimes we do just want to watch media and consume media and not think about it and not,
That's
we
why
all
TV
kind of
exists.
sometimes need. Yeah, we all need some things that we just go, I'm just like, this is my switched off space. I mean, again, especially as someone whose job it is, there's sometimes where I'm like, I don't want to have a critical conversation about something. I just want to
enjoy.
Consume it.
Yeah.
But
I was gonna say, I've joked before, Javier. It's like, oh, what are you guys all playing? And like it's gonna be some kind of cool indie thing. And I'm like, I came home from work and I played Call of Duty for 2 hours, or I've been playing Super Mario 64 because I've played it 1,000 times. I don't have to think about it, and that's fine.
Absolutely.
That's the thing, and it's about being able to occupy dual spaces there, isn't it? I think it's, as we've just been saying, it's incredibly important that we do have these critiques of our different media formats, of what we're consuming, that we're thinking about the ideologies and the discourses that they're perpetuating. But we can do that whilst at the same time going, okay, I understand all of the bad things, and I'm still gonna just let it wash over me for some time to switch off. Or to just say, you know what, I know all of those critiques are out there, but for me, this is just, for today, this is going to be my happy space.
Sure.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I call it junk food for a reason, because it's you don't want that to be all you consume, but at the same time, sometimes you have to kick back with a bag of chips. It's necessary, or you will go insane. So, that's, yeah, and I think, I've talked a lot before about how you have the kind of two spaces of the much more casual sort of audience that I think a lot of people within our space completely miss. If you look at sales, a lot of times indie games are like, oh, I got 75,000 downloads, I am doing well, this is gone viral, and then Call of Duty sells 10 million copies. And it's at a certain point the numbers almost become meaningless to us because they're so big. But the reality is there are 10 million people playing that game. It's still relevant, it's still valid. And I think that it's still open to critique. One of the worst things I hate is with kids' movies or comedies or things like that. For some reason, I'm still more movie-oriented than game-oriented. Don't think too much into it. But whenever people talk about that and they're just like, oh, it's just a kids' movie. Yeah, but
no, that's the worst.
Good movies.
Yeah, kids' media is the stuff that we should be critiquing the most. I think for me, It's about having the skills, right? I think it's super important that we have the skills to do that critical thinking, that we have the impetus to do that critical thinking. And I think, again, that's we need to understand how to use those skills, how to understand the importance of doing that criticality, of doing that analysis, of understanding that media isn't harmless. But once we do have those skills, then yeah, like equally, we're all part of this media system, right? Where it's in the world around us, and so at sometimes we are just going to become kind of victims to it washing over us.
At the same time, I believe that we're improving this system, even though it looks slow, or that specifically what as individuals we want to see, it's not happening. But on general long-term views, things are moving, I believe, in the right direction. YouTube has now sections only for kids, and videos only for kids, and comments are turned off completely there. It makes sense, yeah. I've seen some awful YouTube comments. It makes a lot of sense. You don't want discourse everywhere, the option of discourse everywhere. And in that sense, what I think is missing, unfortunately with you guys, we're doing it, is find ways for people who care about games to discover better ways to discuss them, better ways to discover them as well. Because I can be on my trench, let's say, as a developer, and I see some problems, but maybe they are not as relevant for you. And on the other side, maybe there are problems that are equally interesting for all of us. And the sum of all of us is therefore more powerful in order to actually make change happen.
Yeah.
So we have grabbed up again another title, a very interesting title. We have already candidates of next games, and we're going to see what you guys vote for. We have your proposition, Poppy. There's also been the one about the visual novel that even Bobcat and myself, we already downloaded, the one recommended by you. And
Death Come True.
Yeah.
Death Come True.
If you guys want to propose another game, absolutely. Tomorrow I'll create the poll so that we can vote here on Discord. But I look forward to both of these games. What's happening is that sometimes we don't have enough time to play, but that is the best of problems, I believe. So have a great Sunday as ever, guys.
Alrighty.
Thanks so much.
See ya.
Bye.